I'm JJ Hunt, and you are listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series, Beyond Your Narrator episode.
Today we have Micah Grossman. He is a production specialist, an audio description writer, a voiceover talent, and an audio description engineer. Thanks for joining us, Micah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What do you love about audio description?
I think the puzzle is the challenge of figuring out how can I convey what's going on in the fewest number of words and trying to find the most efficient way to get that language. That's always been something that's been appealing to me. As soon as I watched my mom start writing video description, it immediately kind of got my brain thinking and worrying around, and I've always found it a very stimulating, rewarding job.
Very cool. And I guess the puzzle aspect really implies that there's a lot of different pieces. Can you go into some of the different angles that you've found that you've contributed most?
The phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words, well, moving pictures must be worth millions of words after a minute or two. So we don't have unlimited time. So it's trying to figure out, like, what's the most important thing or things going on, and how can I most effectively get those conveyed to people? How can I shave off syllables? How can I shave out words? Finding ways to do that's always been especially the collaborative part of it when doing live QCs, hearing feedback from description quality specialists who are blind and low vision, who are the intended audience. They're the proxy for the audience. And so it's always helpful for me to hear when they tell me that something's unclear or something isn't working, and then, okay, let's workshop this. Let's figure out how to get to where we need to get to. One of the more interesting ones early on, I remember, was when I did X-Men and the question of identity, because you're introduced to characters as a regular person, and then later they become a superhero, and so it's like, when is it Logan, when is it Wolverine, when is it Scott, when is it Cyclops, when is it, that was an interesting thing we had. We've done some other superhero projects since that's always been something I've been able to pull back and lean on as good lessons that we worked on back then.
Very cool. How have you grown since back then to today? Either how the business has changed or how you have evolved?
Oh, wow. I mean, the business, like when I started, this was 2002. Back then we were still working off cassette tapes, using the VCR to play back, and the ease and efficiency that downloading a digital file and having a better crisp resolution that I can and having much more precise manipulation of frame by frame advancement, that makes the job I've saved a lot of time thanks to that kind of technology change. Over the years also, when I first started, we only were getting a couple of movies a week, and as a writer, maybe it would take me 6 to 12 hours to write, but that's only, that's not really filling out a work week. And so trying to get more hours, I kept pestering our GM, Rick Boggs, let me try doing quality control for other writers' scripts. And once I got comfortable with that, like, oh, I could do this while you're doing voiceover. That way, when the director can have someone helping check the script while they're worrying about the performance and watching enough voiceover, I said, I think I could try directing some of these. And after being a director for several sessions, I was watching the recording engineer and realizing, oh, I can do this. Nothing that he's doing here is beyond me. So I, pestered to let me try doing recording engineering. After doing that for a little while, pestering some more, like, let me try editing. And then after editing, let me try mixing. And then, cool, by that point, I could do delivering to a client. And it got to the point where I'm able to the reason I use the term production specialist is I can do start to finish production. And I don't know if there's any, or certainly not a lot, of other people who work in this business who can do start to finish, the engineering, the writing, quality control, voicing, directing, any of that, like that total package. So I would definitely say that's the most obvious way to say how I've grown, is by taking on more hats. What I've also learned from that was, being in the voiceover, I could see how maybe I structured scripts that weren't necessarily the most effective for some voiceover artists, or maybe after I was doing a lot of editing or mixing, it'd make me think about how I was placing some of my description, finding better sound cues or internal cues, or just by sitting in a different part of the production pipeline, I can look at other jobs in it with a new perspective and try to find ways to be more efficient to help everybody else out along the way.
It sounds like that perspective, inefficiency, has really influenced all the different hats, that you really are a multi-specialist.
Yeah, I really enjoy every aspect of it. What's nice is because I can do all those things, it's harder to get burned out when you can just, it's like, oh, I'm not really doing a lot. I'm kind of burned out because I've been doing a lot of writing, but that's okay because maybe it's time to go do some voicing, or maybe someone else needs me to do some editing, or we got some finished projects that need to get mixed. And it helps make the day or the work week feel less monotonous because there's always so much turnover, both because the projects are coming in and out fairly quickly and all these different tasks that I can just pivot in and out of.
Yeah, and with that, it sounds like you have a lot of choice too, that you're able to pivot from one role to another.
When we started at AudioWise, which is like around, I think it was the summer of 12, that was when the mandate came back because of the CVAA, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. I think if I got that right. That was when I came back into doing description full time. There was a lull when the first mandate got overturned, and I had to go find other work. But when I came back in, it wasn't that I had so much choices, that we had a lot of work and I was one of the few people who could do anything. So it's like, what's busy right now? Throw Micah at it because that's where the bottleneck is at the moment. We just need to get stuff moving along through the pipeline.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
What about other experiences outside of audio description? How have they influenced your work in audio description?
I did a stint as a video game QA tester. I always enjoyed doing the localization testing in foreign languages, and I also always would hammer on the subtitles. I was always drawn to the accessibility and the localization part of that business, trying to think about how do you try to describe something that's interactive. That's always been something in the back of my head, trying to think about. And then also the accessibility and localization, how other media handles it, can also, thinking about like lessons learned from that that I could bring back into description. Description is still, even though it's been around for about 30, 40 years, it's still very much in a nascent stage. It's going to blow up very soon, I feel. And I know part of that blow up is going to be multi-language. As accessibility becomes a big push globally, I'm really excited about seeing how description adapts and changes to the needs of different languages and different cultures.
In addition to that multi-language change, what other changes would you love to see with audio description if you could have the dream world?
Since there's been a fair amount of description produced of the same kind of, the same kind of content gets described over and over again. And so it'd be fun if there was a way for the audience to be able to pick and choose which ones they like. You couldn't possibly get a better way to sort of find out whose approaches are more effective, like whether it's how they cast voice, how they write their scripts, how they choose to edit and mix, than being able to have people readily be able to check what was the WGBH approach to this movie, or what was the AudioWise approach to this movie, or what was the Deluxe Digital, or IUNO, or all these different kind of companies. When people have different experiences with different approaches of it, it's still useful and interesting, but like that direct side-by-side comparison, I think, would be really illuminating for everybody. I'd love to see description just be fully embraced to the point where it's not this tacked on, add-on afterthought, something where it's like an intentional thing that people embrace and understand. This is how you ensure that the widest possible audience can experience and enjoy your programming, whatever it's a movie or TV show, internet serial, whatever.
Very cool to hear about that difference between the add-on and the part of.
Yeah.
Can we go back to what you said about the different approaches? One of the things that's been fascinating about all our interviews, whether it's the voice talents or people like you who do many different roles, actually, you're one of the few that does so many different roles. So this is probably the perfect question to ask you. When you look at the different approaches to audio description, like you said, there's different approaches with different companies. Is there one thing that you could say that really boils down what quality and excellence is in audio description?
I think the single biggest thing is respecting the audience. If you respect the audience, you're going to avoid some of the worst mistakes because I was very fortunate in my development that all of my scripts, we would QC live with a sighted person who knew about description, who could check the accuracy, and a blind person who was there letting me know how effective the description was. Was what I was writing clear? Could they understand it? Was it going to be something that was going to take people out of the moment, or was it going to let them still just, was it going to feel something that was natural, as if it was always intended to be part of that program? So that constant feedback, I'd get notes of oh yeah, this other company does this. I don't like this. Don't do this. I prefer if you try this kind of an approach, and so, instead of me making a lot of those mistakes and learning from them, or at least having those mistakes made and released to the public, those mistakes would be caught in the QC process. And that was definitely how I learned a lot of the kind of conventions that blind people have gotten used to, but don't necessarily enjoy. And then, so, well, if you don't enjoy it, then let's see if we can come up with something better. And there's an approach that British description has that I've heard from a lot of my DQs that is very storytelling, that assumes that the blind audience can't follow along. And so there's kind of a helping hand quality to it that they can find condescending or patronizing. The AudioWise approach has always been to default to just be as objective as possible. If something's unclear, maybe it's unclear for the sighted audience, and maybe we shouldn't try to overdo or overcorrect when the point is maybe you are supposed to have some ambiguity here. Maybe you are supposed to have some uncertainty.
Do you see AudioWise influencing those international or even national companies that do provide audio description?
I mean, I certainly hope that by trying to have a high standard for the writing, a high standard for the casting choices, and a high standard for the audio quality we put out, I hope that's been something that has raised the bar for other companies to have to meet and match. We're trying to give the blind audience the best possible experience. And ideally, if we're really doing everything right, they can watch it with their sighted friends and family, and their sighted friends and family don't feel like it's a burden. It doesn't feel like I have to humor, somebody else. If it's done really well, it feels seamless to even sighted audiences, and makes it where they're completely removes any kind of friction about an accessibility service.
And as you said earlier, it's respecting the audience. You didn't specify blind and low vision audience. You said audience.
Right, because the audience has so many different experiences. One of my DQs was born without eyes, not out sight, out eyes, literally without any eyes. So never had a chance to see. We've had other DQs who lost their sight as children. We have other DQs who've lost their sight as adults. And so they have different kinds of memories of what they could remember seeing, and that can shade what their personal preference might be, but we always have to strive to what can serve the broadest possible. It's not, the DQ has to remember, it's not about, is this the best thing for you specifically? You're a stand-in, a proxy for the broader audience. And so there are some where we would have a DQ who prefers really minimal description, and they'd say I don't need this, but I know other people probably would, so let's keep it. And trying to be thoughtful of the broad variety and array of experiences that people have had when it comes to visual impairment.
And it sounds like you're really addressing that spectrum, that there is an assumption. I'm assuming that some of the clients that you've worked for have a false assumption that it's binary. It's either sighted or blind, that blind word doesn't have the spectrum that you're very clearly aware of.
I think some of our clients don't even have that much thought that they put into it. It's just, for some of them, it's just a box they have to check. For others, it's that kind of simplistic. I mean, I definitely had a lot of misconceptions before I started working with a lot of blind people. Not necessarily pejorative, but just didn't know. But by working with so many really talented, capable blind people, understanding that, yes, of course, there's going to be setbacks and shortcomings because we live in a visual world and not everything has been designed for them. But fewer setbacks, fewer obstacles, the problem-solving ability that humans are innately blessed with is, it's really something to see. And it was always educational for me to remind myself, trust that if they can't do it, they'll say it. Don't assume that they can't. Let them tell you that, you know what, I need some help on this.
When it comes to that box to check, that minimum, okay, we've done it.
Yeah,
that's pejorative. When it comes to maybe even your own education, if you look back on how your assumptions were interrupted, how you didn't know and you changed, has any of that had any influence on clients that have turned around from seeing this beyond just a box to check?
We've definitely had some who over time have come to appreciate, and they've been open-minded enough that they could learn and grow from it. Absolutely. There's others who were always innately curious and knew that they didn't know. And that's always the best. When you know you don't know, you're not going to be defensive. You're not going to have barriers put up. You're already in a good spot to be receptive to learning something new. Those ones, when they push us, they're pushing us to be better as opposed to pushing us to fit some constraint that they have that's not really useful. It's just something that's in their head of what they're supposed to be doing.
I hate to get binary on that, but it sounds like we've really categorized the curious versus the Dunningkruger effect, where the people just assume, oh, I know everything, or
that has definitely come up for sure. Yes. And some of those have over time been willing to learn and correct, and some of them haven't. And we just have to learn how to give them what they ask without feeling like we've compromised ourselves too much, or we don't want to put out anything that we're not happy with. So we'll try to please the client and give them what they want. But if they want us to do something that we just feel really isn't right, we will push back and say, no, there's a reason we're doing it this way. It's this, like, you came to us because you trust us to know this, and you need to now in this moment trust that we know what we're doing here. We haven't had too much problem with that. But with some clients, you just have to sort of like pick your battles. Like, some of these minor things, whatever. It'd be better to do it the way we liked, but it's not going to ruin the project. But there's other times you have to like stand tall and say, the audience needs it this way. We really have to insist on this.
Yeah, it sounds like a real compromise to bring it
Exactly.
to the best place.
Like, they're the client, but they're not the audience. They're the client. And so there's times where the interests of those two groups align, and there are times where they don't. And we try our best to try to keep them in alignment as much as we can, but the client is paying the bill. And so if they want something, unless we really feel like it is just absolutely wrong, or it's gonna really be detrimental, you have to respect that the client's paying for this and they get what they want.
Let's go back to the audience. When it comes to feedback from the audience, what are some of the things that you love to hear, whether feedback is constructive or positive?
I honestly don't get a lot of feedback from the broader audience. I don't have any like social media that's deliberately out there to grab that. I know there's some Facebook groups, and I think there's like a Reddit subgroup or two, but I just haven't spent a lot of time getting that. The feedback I usually get is from my blind coworkers who are giving me feedback on my scripts as we're in the production process. That's where I get it most often. But I know I have a couple sighted fans of my Shark Tank work. They reached out to AudioWise over Twitter saying that ever since they stumbled upon it, they always want to watch it with Description on because they love my delivery for that.
Very cool. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Micah?
Oh, wow. I think Description's a really fascinating field, and it's only going to keep growing. In a time where economic uncertainty and employment uncertainty is out there, I encourage people who've got a willingness to learn and a facility, either as a vocal performer or as a writer or as an audio engineer, or even just somebody who's really detail oriented. Somebody who's detail oriented could be a really good script quality supervisor and think of it as like a fact check of a description script. There's lots of different roles in the business, and there's only going to be more of it coming, because as more and more content is being produced, there's more and more content that needs to be described.
Very cool. How can people reach you, Micah?
I don't have any social media that I have outwardly facing. I guess if people want to get in touch with me, my AudioWise email is micah@audiowise.com.
Very cool. Thanks so much for joining us, Micah.
Thank you so much for having me, Roy. This is a lot of fun.